I'm Brian Amkraut, the Executive Director of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University. It's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for our program, Envisioning the Future of Cleveland with Steve Hoffman, interviewed by Dan Moulthrop. We want to thank a number of partners who've helped support this event. Of course, Jewish Federation and City Club for their direct participation, the Cleveland Jewish News Foundation, the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University, and Teaching Cleveland Digital. Special thank you, I think she's still outside in the hall, to Cheryl Hirsch, because it's her birthday. I know many of you know Cheryl, so she's still working hard, but hopefully we'll let her get out to enjoy the evening later. A couple of public service announcements about upcoming programs here in the Lifelong Learning Program. Next week, on Wednesday evening, January 21st, we are going to have NASA astronaut Michael Foreman with us. You may have seen some postcards out in front with that information, and you may receive some additional information in the mail. February 18th, we'll be hosting Scott Cowan, who many of you know, former dean at Case Western Reserve University and recently retired president of Tulane. I'll be talking about the rebuilding of New Orleans. March 18th and 19th, we will have Jane Eisner, who is the editor of the Jewish Daily Forward. March 25th, Israeli author Etgar Keret. And I also want to announce May 4th, ask you to save the date. We will be holding a benefit fundraising event for the Lifelong Learning Program with local author Mary Doria Russell, whose talk in the spirit of lifelong learning is titled A Life of Curiosity. All of this information, all of our upcoming courses are available on our website. I'd like to make one additional plug for a program coming this summer. As part of our travel program, we'll be running a Jewish heritage trip to Germany with our own faculty, Dr. Alana Cooper and Dr. Jay Geller. Really an interesting opportunity with experts to study history on the ground. A piece of information about our structure tonight. After Dan's interview, we will have the opportunity for question and answers, but we ask everyone to put those questions on note cards, which are being handed out. If you would like a note card and you don't have one, just raise your hand and we'll make sure you get one. And then when you have a note card filled out, again, just hold it up and we will collect it and make sure it gets passed up front. Our speaker this evening, our interviewer is Dan Moulthrop, who is the CEO at the City Club of Cleveland. He is the former curator of conversation at the Civic Commons and one of the co-founders of the Civic Commons as well. He lives with his wife and 3 children in Shaker Heights. And he will be interviewing Stephen Hoffman, who many of you have known for many years here in Cleveland, president of the Jewish Federation of Cleveland. Steve is a graduate of Dickinson College and received his Master's of Social Work from University of Maryland and a Master's in Jewish Studies from Baltimore Hebrew University. He does have a longer, extensive bio, but really he just does so much for our community here in Cleveland and the Jewish community nationally and internationally. I will allow you to go and find the additional details on your own. Before we begin the interview, it's my pleasure to invite Larry Friedman from the Cleveland Jewish News Foundation to bring some words of greetings from the CJN Foundation. Thank you all for joining us, and there will be refreshments afterwards.
I don't really think I need to make many more introductions than that. Thank you very much. I am Larry Friedman. I'm on the board of the Cleveland Jewish News Foundation, and we're very pleased to be co-sponsoring this event as well. We thank you all for coming out tonight on this cold Cleveland evening. Just want to let you know the 3 goals of our foundation are: 1, to maintain and support the Cleveland Jewish News Digital Archive, also to support the Cleveland Jewish News Internship Program, which will assist students in journalism to get credits and to assist the paper in creative work, and finally to get community events like this on education out. And that's all I wanted to say. I'll leave it to our speaker and our moderator, and thank you very much for attending.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. We are going to, as Brian said, we're going to talk up here. The event is scheduled for roughly 90 minutes or so, so we're going to get the conversation started up here and then weave your questions in as we get to, in about a half hour, 45 minutes or so. So we look forward to that. The title of our event tonight, Steve, is Envisioning the Future of Jewish Cleveland. And before we get to the future, I thought we might start in the present. How's Jewish Cleveland today? What is the state of Jewish Cleveland?
Aside from being a little cold, we're in a pretty healthy spot at the moment, depending upon what index you want to use to measure health. So,
what index do you use?
Oh, I use a lot of them. Depends if I'm having a good day or a bad day. On a good day like today, our population is strong. We did a study a few years ago, and we're surprised, but pleasantly so, as many people still know, I think, that we're just under 81,000 Jews, people who identify as Jewish. And if you include other people who live in households with Jews, we come up to closer to almost 100,000.
So how does that, am I counted in that as a Jew who, and is my wife and family counted in that?
Well, it would depend how you, the answer is yes. And whether
Yeah,
you're in the
I don't know if I got
81
the phone call,
or
but-
the 98, it would depend on how your family would have answered questions about how you identify, how your wife identifies, how you're raising your children, et cetera.
Okay. So if you identify as Jewish, you're one of the 81,000.
Correct.
That's great. That's sort of you didn't obviously talk to 81,000 people.
No,
That's
but
a
we
lot of
did
phone
a
calls.
random digit dial survey. So we did about as scientific a demographic study as you could do. We spent a significant amount of money to do that with a very large sample of thousands.
And that's across Northeast Ohio or in Cuyahoga County?
It's in Cuyahoga County and the edges. We don't count Akron. But we go a little bit into Lake County, a little bit into Lorain County at the edges. But the bulk of the community is right here.
But that's about 5 to 8% of the probably 1.2, 1.3 million people in that area.
Yeah, I think I think we think about 4 or 5%.
4 or 5%.
Yeah.
Were you afraid the number was going to be a lot smaller?
Well,
I mean, you sounded like you were.
we thought that based on anecdotal stuff that people were leaving Cleveland because job opportunities weren't perceived to be as robust as you would like, and that we had a situation. We did a study.
Because the number is down, right? It's from the 2000 or
No,
the last time
we've
you
been
done the
stable
study?
for 14 years. That's what
not bad.
surprised us. We did a study before 1990 or so, and in that study we found that almost all of our young people went away to college, and only half came back, and half went to other places in the United States. We found nationally that that's true for most of Jewish communities. Almost all the kids go away to college, and about half come back. But other cities had other people's kids coming to them.
We weren't getting anybody else's kids.
Well, we weren't in the previous study. Atlanta got our kids, New York got our kids, Chicago got our kids. Those were the big three destinations. And so we just thought that naturally we were drifting down, but it turned out we're not. And the anecdotes have actually turned around. We have a lot of people who are returning to Cleveland to live, both right after school or some years after school. And so we're seeing people coming back for family businesses or because they feel they can get a job in Cleveland, and I guess they like the water.
The fresh water is an asset. It is.
It will become more and more so.
Yes. And it tastes great, too. So that study, that 2011 study,
Yeah.
pointed out that while the community is stable and most people feel highly connected to their Jewishness, however that's defined, and we should talk about that at some point, but the study pointed to a growing minority that don't feel particularly connected. How concerned are you and your team at the Federation about that growing minority?
Well, you're always concerned with how people identify and whether they are connected. And there's a lot of sociological forces affecting us. We are a counterculture phenomenon in America.
What do you mean by that?
Well, America, in its current phase, believe it or not, is actually becoming more unchurched, less religious identification. Everybody except the so-called Tea Party guys. And I haven't done a study of them, so I don't know how many of the Tea Party are actually unchurched as well. But generally speaking, we're becoming a more secular society. And to identify Jewishly can mean one of two things. One, you could identify secularly and be Jewish. There's actually a very small but strong, active secular Jewish community. But then there's people who identify secularly and don't join. Second,
you could be culinarily Jewish.
Yeah, we call that ethnic. And then, of course, we count all the Chinese on Christmas Day.
On Christmas Day, of course.
But then there's the issue of joining.
Right.
What does it mean to join? So when I grew up, I'm about a generation ahead of you, people were still joiners, and organizations like B'nai B'rith, American Jewish Congress, B'nai B'rith Women, and similar groups, they had very strong affiliations, and people joined, people paid dues. They joined, they actually went to group meetings. Well, in the last 40 years that I've been professionally engaged here in Cleveland, you have a very precipitous drop-off. Some of these organizations are like paper organizations today relative to what they were then. Many have gone out of business, like American Jewish Congress. And people are less willing today to join organizations. They're more transactional.
Sure.
We even have this phenomenon with the membership of the Jewish Community Center. People don't want to be members necessarily. They want to buy what they want to buy. So that leads to less affiliation. Same with synagogues. People don't necessarily want to be members today. They want to go on the high holidays, and if the synagogues offered modest price tickets, they would probably sell out the seats much the way they go today. They just wouldn't be able to open their doors the day after the high holidays. So there's this challenge about synagogue membership, and the younger generation for sure is joining less because they don't have the traditional ties about membership. They're looking for the transaction. It's not a uniform, but it's more typical than not.
Why do you think that is? Like, why isn't my generation, which I think is sort of what we're talking, my generation and younger, I'm Gen X.
That's okay.
Thank you. Why is it that we're not as interested in joining things? What is it that we're...
I think it has to do with this notion of picking and choosing what I want, what's relevant to me at the time that I want to do it. For example, I'm also a board member of the Cleveland Orchestra. My wife and I are subscribers. We've been subscribers 30 years or something like that. And we'd like to go. And I'm the kind of guy who, if I don't have a subscription, I may not go because I won't do anything at the last minute. My daughters, who are also in the audience, are different. They don't subscribe, generally. They decide, we want to go to this event, and then they go. So at the orchestra, we're seeing subscriptions drifting down, and we're seeing single ticket sales growing.
Sure.
And it's being driven by the change in how people view the value of long-term commitments.
That's interesting.
They want to buy things now when they want it.
They're not, yeah, I know. They don't want to be in a cable contract or a cell phone contract or
Right.
have to know that.
Let alone pay for information. I mean, why are newspapers going away? They're still putting the same stuff out. They're just, you get it now either for free
Right.
or when you want to buy it, you buy it.
So what does that mean if there's this growing minority that doesn't feel connected to particular Jewish organizations, whether it's the JCC or the Temple or the Federation? What do you do with that? How do you serve those people? How do you engage those people?
Well, one of the things we have to do is become more event-focused for activities with young people.
As opposed to?
As opposed to leadership training programs, which might require a commitment of
A day a month for a year.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll still do that for a select number of people who we think are interested in becoming leaders. But if you want to reach the masses, you have to run events and then try to put some fun element in, which is part of why they'll come out, to have fun, and at the same time introduce the meaning of engaging with the community. And then people will find their level of support. There's also a shift in where young people are spending their time. Marriages have been delayed. Child rearing is coming later. So it's occupying a period of time in young people's life cycle later in their life, and therefore it actively competes with where they might have spent their time in the past.
Right. Right. So in your 40s, in your late 30s, in your early 40s, you're dealing with small children rather than getting engaged in sitting on a board and going to a meeting at the JCC.
Right. And there's a shift in parenting mores and the like.
The fathers are more involved.
Fathers are more involved, and there's a lot more activity. I didn't have this, but younger folks than me, like traveling sports programs where they're gone all weekend with teams, competitions.
No, I know. My son's hitchhiking home from soccer tonight because I'm here. Just kidding, sort of.
You'll find out.
I will. Sticking with the demographics for a second, is there a place where the Jewish population is stronger than others in terms of like the religious sort of categories, the Orthodox Jewish community and the Reformed Jewish community and so forth? Where's the growth?
The demographic growth is in the Orthodox community because they have a religiously compelled ideological commitment to having more children. The replacement rate for maintenance of current numbers of any definition defined group is 2.1. The birth rate outside of the Orthodox community is, I don't know, 1.5, 1.7, I think. And so we're not, the non-Orthodox Jews are not replacing themselves at the same rate as you need to sustain. So in the long run, it means you have the potential to decrease. It can be offset by the intermarriage rate, where you have other children who may join you that might not have been there in the past, in terms of sheer numbers. Because there you don't have one Jew marrying another Jew. You have one Jew marrying a non-Jew, so by definition, you have more people to work with.
Does that set up difficult tensions decades down the road if the in terms of priorities, that the Orthodox population might feel that compelled towards a different set of priorities than the secular Jewish population?
You have that today. We deal with it today. The thing about Cleveland is that early on, back in the late 40s, the then majority non-Orthodox community, which is still the majority in the Jewish community in Cleveland, made a determination that it was going to be openly supportive of the most important agenda in the Orthodox community, which was education. And we became the first federation to support a Jewish day school. Today, you say you're supporting a Jewish day school, and people yawn. If they don't want to yawn, they'll say, so how much are you doing it? You know, the tension is around how much support are you doing. But in 1948, the battle was, why would we support a day school? You know, we're public school people. We weren't into private schools back then.
Right. So where does that sit today then?
Today we support 2 non-Orthodox day schools, and we support two Orthodox day schools, and we give a little lesser support to a third.
And by support, you're
financial
support.
Yeah, serious.
An order of magnitude of
hundreds of thousands of dollars a school. Hebrew Academy gets over $1 million from the annual campaign. So we became in 1948 the embodiment of a Jewish community that supports all of its members in the way that they want to be identified. We're not interested in telling them, you got to be like this or you got to be like that. Our objective in our schools and other aspects of Jewish life is to say, we want to help you be the best kind of Jews that you want to be. We don't judge.
Who sets the giving agenda these days?
Who sets the giving agenda?
And how does
the donors.
The donors. But I guess my question is, I mean, you've seen in my world and in your world too, when you're raising money, you have a lot of these conversations with philanthropy. And I have noticed in the past few years, everyone from the Cleveland Foundation down to small family foundations and donor-advised funds are shifting their giving towards and kind of revamping things. We don't like the way we've been doing it. We really want to focus on this program area or that program area. How does the Federation make these decisions? And how does the Federation, and with things that you've been giving to and supporting for a long time, how does the Federation make a decision to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore, we're shifting?
Well, generally speaking, we don't shift where there is continued strong support for what's going on. There has always been a history of strong donor interests for different things. And occasionally you find that certain kinds of services are no longer supported or in demand, or locations of the service run their course geographically, and you have to change. And so in my tenure here, the first thing that we lost was the Jewish Convalescent and Rehabilitation Center. It turned out that it was built in the heart of a Jewish community that evaporated in the 70s. And the service was no longer being used. Interestingly, today, if it still existed, it'd be in high demand, and there's even new facilities being built just near where the old one used to be.
Where was it?
It was on, I think, Harvard Road somewhere in Warrensville Heights. I've been there, but I can't remember. It's so long ago.
Yeah, there's a UH has just built a brand new one.
Well, that's much further east than where this was. But it fell apart, and it's gone. Siegel College has been repurposed, in a sense, with Case Western Reserve University, because the dynamics of adult Jewish education and preparation of people who are interested in advanced studies in Jewish knowledge became much more common on the university campus. Then there was less of a need for it in specialized institutions, different than it was in the 20s when these kind of institutions started to be created. We used to have a communal supplemental school, an afternoon school. It began meeting 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then it stopped altogether because the synagogues became the dominant supplemental provider, and so that's gone. And probably some other things I've forgotten that we've gotten rid of.
So you mentioned that you're still giving to 6 or 7 Jewish day schools. Where else is the money going these days?
Our biggest allocation in Cleveland is the Jewish Family Service. It's our social safety net for the community. And it becomes more important every year because the needs of the society are changing.
Well, demographically, I mean, we're supposed to, between 2000 and 2030, the number of senior citizens is doubling.
Right. They're dealing with that. But they're also dealing with mental illness. There's much more comfort in talking about things today than maybe there was 30 years ago. There's more government money, and we can now better marry government money with private money to produce services to make sure that people in the Jewish community at least can get access to what they need. There are growing challenges with dementia, Alzheimer's, and related issues. People are delaying institutionalization greatly. When I was first in the planning department, which is 38 years ago, the average age entering the nursing home, I think, was in the high 70s. And people stayed for years. They were residents for years. Today, I'm guessing the average age at entry is close to 86 to 88, somewhere in that range. And I'm suspecting that the average stay could be under a year.
Wow.
You know, maybe it's a year and a half, but you go into the nursing home today in a much less capable position. Everything is done to help people stay in their own home, or we've got the intermediaries of congregate living or assisted living, and there's more services available in your own home, and there's a variety of levels. So all kinds of alternatives have been developed. So the nursing homes are rapidly changing. We had at one point approximately 600 beds for nursing home use. And I think today, Eric is here somewhere, but I think today that 600 effectively is probably under 400 of what people think is nursing home. The balance now is assisted living. Some of it's been devoted to people with Alzheimer's issues who are healthy. They just need to live in a supervised environment, and rehab.
Outside of Cleveland, where's the money going?
There, the money is going to the Jewish Agency for Israel and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, and also in the last 17 years, we developed special programs in Israel and in Russia that we do directly as Cleveland without the intermediaries of the Joint or the Jewish Agency per se.
What do you do? What's the money supporting exactly? Or
so the money that
enough.
we're running directly in Israel was used to to promote literacy among Ethiopian immigrant children. In 1997, we found that 50% of Ethiopian kindergarten kids were flunking kindergarten. They had to repeat it. And it had to do with the fact that the kids were not up to the same level as native-born Israelis when they entered kindergarten, and they didn't have the literacy, or I guess my wife would say, pre-literacy skills that, at least I think, she might say, but I will, pre-literacy skills that parents give the kids before they enter into kindergarten. And because the parents were illiterate. So they were from Ethiopia. Ethiopia has an oral history tradition. They're not literate in Hebrew for sure, and they weren't literate in Amharic, their native language, because it's an oral tradition on the villages, not a written tradition. So, you know, everybody tells you how you have to read to your kids in order to get them ready for school, et cetera, et cetera. And these kids weren't getting read to. But, and they weren't going into preschool programs either. And Israeli native kids were entering preschool programs as early as the age of 3. So with the Joint Distribution Committee, we developed a program in Beersheba, which had the largest group of Ethiopian young people. And we worked with organizations on the ground, and we developed pre-literacy programs in the preschools, and then we paid for the kids to enter preschool. And we went door to door in Beersheba, where the Ethiopians live, and we enrolled them all in preschools. And in a few years, we changed the literacy, kindergarten failure rate from 50% to 4%, which is the norm.
That's absolutely wonderful.
And we're still pursuing that.
Have you shared any of the learning from that with the folks in Cuyahoga County who are trying to do universal pre-K?
We have.
Is Armand here?
But you know,
No.
there's no magic. It was a matter of
it's work. It's just work.
Of doing it. And eventually, I think in the last year or so, the Israeli government finally put the money into preschools. So we've been able to back out some of our money from the original investment and broaden it to other places. And so we've introduced the program elsewhere. Eventually, we were reaching 70% of Ethiopian preschool kids across Israel.
That's really
so
cool.
that was a big thing we developed. We also developed a big program for women's health in Israel. We developed another program for social misfits who were being recruited into the Israeli army. The Israeli army constantly was recruiting people that they wouldn't normally take because they had drug issues, bad run-ins with the law, et cetera. But the Israeli army decided it was going to make a last-ditch effort to get the kids on the right path. Because if you go into the Israeli army and you have a successful experience, somebody will hire you when you finish. If you don't go in the Israeli army and you have a bad record, no one's going to hire you. So it's like being branded for life as a loser. And so they were doing this. And in the early years, 17 years ago, when computers were still something new, we introduced a computer program into this base in Israel. Today, it's evolved. Everybody's into the computers now, even if you're a misfit. And we've shifted to two things. We're doing anti-drug work with the Israeli army, and we're also using Belfair to provide training to the Israeli army commanders on how to deal with socially challenging young people. The Israeli army puts young women in charge of this program, young women officers, but they don't give them a lot of training. So we've been doing the training through Belfair.
That's great. That's great.
That's just some of the things we've been doing.
How much money are we talking about on an annual basis that goes to all of these programs?
Well, the annual campaign this year raised $30.3 million. And on top of that, we'll get another $1.7 million from United Way. And that's what we put into these programs.
Is that 32, 33 million, is that pretty standard over recent years, or is that less, more?
Well, in 2008, we had $2.5 million more to work with. But the Great Recession took out a chunk of the community's financial capacity, and we've been building it back ever since.
What's the endowment look like right now?
The endowment is somewhere in the area of about 110, 120 million. I don't know, the market dropped a little today.
When you have that much, it can have such an effect.
Yeah. Yeah. But we don't look at it every day.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
Right.
What is the endowment supporting right now? Is that all sort of donor-advised stuff that's tagged to specific
I
things?
just reflected on the actual money that the Federation has at the discretion of its board. We run a balance sheet of $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion. That's tremendous.
Yeah, it is.
What is it all for?
Well, then you're getting into supporting foundations. We're a very successful community at partnering with very generous people who want to create foundations, but they want to create it in partnership with the Federation. And there's quite a bit of that is reflected in that balance sheet number. And we have about 50 supporting foundations, and each one of them has the ability to pursue their own mission. So some of them are into improving the condition of the general community. Some of them are very heavily invested in changing the world by investing in leaders in various sectors of the society. Another foundation is very focused on Jewish education. So there's they have these, and then there's others that are just saying we want to just do good.
Who gets to decide what good is?
The directors of those supporting foundations, each of them has their own board.
How many of them are you on the board?
I'm on the board, I think, of about 7 or 8 of them.
In the context of $2.8 billion, that's the number? 2.8?
2.5.
2.5. The market went down. Okay. In the context of that, what do you say to the individual member of the community why they should give $500 or $50 or $1,000?
Well, there's several responses. First, the money that we raise through the annual campaign is the most precious money that exists in the community because it's undesignated money. That is, it's not given for this purpose or for that purpose. It's given for the purpose of helping the community do what is needed
right now
to promote a social safety net, a Jewish future, emergency, or what have you. All the rest of the money is donor-driven by donor-advised funds or the boards of the supporting foundations. And so there you have the idiosyncratic interests of the donor driving whatever's going to happen.
You mean that in a very positive way, I know.
I said idiosyncratic. This just means individual interests, not idiots. They're some of the smartest people in our community, but they have their personal interests. So, so what these people do is, in almost every case, they make a generous gift relative to what others are doing to the annual campaign of the Federation. The annual campaign of the Federation is distributed after an allocations committee that has, I think, 36 people on it who spend a year poring over the financial books of our agencies, poring over the programmatic offerings of our agencies, looking at what the programmatic challenges are, looking at what the government funding challenges are, looking at the needs of the community, because the planning department and it has a committee of about 30 people who are studying the needs of the community. And that group makes a recommendation of how to use that precious discretionary money. This is the money that is used to literally open the doors every morning at any agency you want to choose. And so that's the most precious money in the community. It's, quote, the free money. It's not pre-tagged to do this or to do that.
Restricted.
And 11,900 people or about just finished a campaign of contributing to that. And there's gifts of $18, and there's gifts of $2.5 million, and everything in between. And
11,000 people contributed?
More than 11,000. And
that is really...
people can feel good.
That number alone is huge.
Yeah, it is. And it's people coming together to say, we want our community to work. And we want to have the ability of our community to meet the needs of our people and not have to, at the last minute, go to see somebody and say, I got this problem, can you help me? Mm-hmm. We have a fundamental infrastructure of agencies and schools that support our people in Cleveland and around the world.
How do Cleveland's numbers in annual fundraising compare to analogous communities or other Jewish communities and other federations?
We have among the highest. We're among the highest per capita donors in the Jewish world. In absolute terms, only New York, L.A., Chicago, and Boston raise more money than us in the United States.
What about the percentage of donors? Like
we're higher than most.
Yeah,
we have greater participation.
Yeah, I mean, 81,000 members of the community and 11,000 people giving is incredible.
Of our city size, like if it compares to Detroit, Baltimore, et cetera, we're way ahead of what that. But that's the strength of organizing. We're not. People will say, "What's the federation? You only call me once a year. You only talk to me once a year for my money." For a lot of people, that's true. It's true. But we don't really see ourselves as a fundraising organization. Others do. It's not so terrible. But I can tell you that when you talk to our board, maybe more important, when you talk to the larger donors in the community, they see us as a community development organization, a community building organization. That's why they support the Federation. Mm-hmm. Now, you need money to do that.
Sure.
But just raising money is not an end unto itself.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel right now Cleveland is it's got a lot of great things going on and some of the most difficult things going on. The challenges with race, bias, and the police department this is probably the toughest time that Mayor Frank Jackson has ever faced in his time in office. Yeah. In the meantime, it's a time of great economic growth that's very visible in ways that this community has been yearning for decades. In the middle of just I guess it was 6 years ago, the Federation moved out to Beechwood, and just last month, I guess, you sold the building.
It hasn't actually sold yet.
A deal was put together.
Right.
A deal was been put together and has not yet been gone through.
Right.
And congratulations on that. Although I hope I haven't just queered the deal by saying congratulations.
I hope not.
Yeah, I'm throwing in a lot of context here, mostly to ask, what's the Federation's role and what's the Jewish community's role in these very significant challenges that the city of Cleveland is facing right now, which of course aren't just the city's challenges?
We have a pretty strong philosophical belief that you can't have a strong Jewish community if the larger community around you is ailing. So we have a responsibility to do our part, sometimes maybe even a little more than what would be nominally our part, to improve society. Mm-hmm. So around the same time that we were talking about moving our building physically to make our operations easier and more effective to manage, we also engaged in a wide-ranging discussion with all kinds of groups in the general community about how to make Cleveland a destination for immigrants.
The Global Cleveland effort.
Global Cleveland, because Al Ratner and others had been talking about what separates a growing American community from being a community that gets left behind. And people would be looking around at, where is their growth? It's in those days, it was happening in Texas, it was happening in Florida, it was actually happening in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And the growth was basically being fueled by redistribution of people in America, mm-hmm. and by immigration. So at the time, it didn't feel like we were going to get a lot of growth from redistribution of the population. Mm-hmm. Jobs were flowing out of Cleveland, the business community might say, in part because of union issues. Other people would have said tax issues at the state level. Mm-hmm. You can pick your belief in in what it was. Mm-hmm. And so we felt that there was potential to build Cleveland by becoming a more welcoming place for immigration. Mm-hmm. And then it's an idea that had been kicked around for more than a decade, but the other organizations in town couldn't get their act together to figure out how to do it. Mm-hmm. So we brought to bear our experience, some might say expertise, in bringing diverse views together and formulating a plan of action. We're used to arguments. Jewish community is a very argumentative place, and but we have a sense of how to weave through the arguments and get someplace constructive. We have a long history of doing that. Began with Moses, so we did that, and we developed a plan for Global Cleveland, mm-hmm. And so Global Cleveland is off and running, and it's had some success, and it's had some stumbles, and we'll see where it goes. But it's a major effort we're making to improve mm-hmm. Cleveland. Similarly, when United Way decided it wanted to make a statement in education around with wraparound schools, yes. where they married social service agencies with individual schools in the Cleveland public school system to try to give the kids more resources to improve. They asked us for money. And our response to United Way was, okay, we'll be in. We'll participate with money. They give us money, right. but they asked us for money, and okay, that's just a Jewish thing. Take, give, take. But we said we'll put in $100,000, mm-hmm. but only if we can actually be engaged mm-hmm. in the project. We don't want to just put money in. We want to bring our volunteers to bear on the program. Mm-hmm. And so we were married up with the Case Elementary School, which I think is around 40th and St. Clair. And it's a challenging neighborhood. I think there's 28% of the school population is homeless. Mm-hmm. And And we brought volunteers in, including the former superintendent of the Shaker school system, a very experienced educator. We brought in Sally Wertheim, who was the former chair of the Department of Education and the dean of John Carroll University, and others like that from the nonprofit world and others who had something to offer to the principal that we're working with and to the Rainey Institute, which is the organization that was married for social services. And I think our engagement with Case Elementary is superior to a lot of the other places that the United Way started working with, because we brought in this outside expertise, not just the social service agency and the money. And we currently have more than 200 volunteers doing tutoring in the Cleveland Public Schools at a number of sites. So we're engaged in trying to reverse Cleveland's demographic projections, and we're in there in a number of ways working on their future with the kids. And of course, we engage through the Greater Cleveland Congregations projects. We're financial supporters, we're volunteer participants, and
I guess that's probably the place where you can have the most impact on this ongoing conversation about race and policing.
one of the places, yeah.
Yeah, that and saying the occasional prayer for Steve Dettelbach.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that you do behind the scenes.
You want to talk about that?
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Israel and Palestine then, because that's fun. Actually, in all seriousness, one of the things that's really the things that's hardest to talk about and even hard to argue about has to do with the relationship between or the future of Israel and its relationship to the Palestinian people. And it's a harder conversation to have here in Cleveland than in many other places. What is our community's relationship to that issue right now? And what do you think our community's relationship to that issue ought to be 5, 10, 20 years from now?
We are overall a staunchly pro-Israel community. We're staunchly Zionistically oriented. And when I say that, I'm talking about the rank and file Cleveland Jew that we encounter, as well as the activist level of people. That is, people who actively engage on the subject matter, not just read the newspaper and say, is it good or bad for the Jews? Is there a diversity of opinion in the community? Yeah. For sure there's a diversity of opinion. Is it overwhelmingly pro-Israel? Yeah. Is it overwhelmingly pro-Prime Minister Netanyahu? I don't know. There's a difference between being fundamentally committed to the justice of Israel's cause, to being aggravated beyond belief about double standards that get applied to Israel, to believe that there is anti-Semitic roots in the double standard that gets applied, and not necessarily believing that the Prime Minister of Israel and the current government always puts the best foot forward towards what many people believe is the ultimate necessary arrangement between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
A two-state solution.
Yeah, a two-state solution. I believe that most Clevelanders, not all, most Clevelanders believe in a two-state solution. There's difference of opinion about how fast you can get there, given the current lack of leadership on the part of the Palestinian people. Dennis Ross wrote an interesting op-ed piece in the New York Times over the New Year's weekend, in which he basically said people were always knocking Netanyahu. I can't remember if he thought it was somewhat justified or not, but where is the accountability of Western Europe for the Palestinians? Where does it hold them accountable for making movement to get the peace talks back on track, instead of going to the international court unilaterally, or continuing to teach hatred in their schools, not recognizing that the right of return is not going to happen?
The move to the International Criminal Court was obviously a bold move, and indicates that there's some leadership capacity there. Why do you think they did that instead of seeking further dialogue?
Because the Palestinian leadership, my view, not the Federation's view, the Palestinian leadership always wants somebody else to do the job for them that they can't do for them, that they won't do for themselves.
What is the job?
Make concessions. At the end of the Clinton administration, Barack and Arafat were sitting in Camp David with Clinton, and Barack was busy negotiating for both sides. He told them what Israel was best for Israel, and he told Arafat what's best for Arafat. But when the dust settled, he was basically offered a deal that would have given him 98% or some such number of the land that he was seeking. And I think Barack was also ready to divide Jerusalem in some fashion. And Arafat's advisors were telling him, take the deal, and Arafat couldn't bring himself to take the deal, because Arafat was not going to be the Palestinian leader who said to his people, you're not going to use your keys to go back to your homes in Jaffa, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he walked away, and it fell apart. When Prime Minister Olmert was in power, just before he was brought up on the corruption charges, he was in negotiations with Abbas. And he was ready to divide Jerusalem. And he had made, again, a far-reaching proposal to divvy up the land and get at the fundamental issues. And Abbas refused to move. He didn't bite. More recently, President Obama presented a plan to Abbas in private, and pretty much followed what everybody believes the plan should be. And again, Abbas didn't respond. And then in the most recent negotiations, and members of the U.S. State Department, including Martin Indyk, blamed Bibi Netanyahu for killing the negotiations. But there were other commentators who said, once again, the Palestinians just wouldn't respond because they're not willing, the leadership is not willing to tell their people the reality of what a two-state solution means, which is you're not going to go back to your homes of 1948, that there have to be other financial arrangements made, and that maybe some people will come back into Israel proper, but not nearly what they've been talking about, and the Palestinian leadership just won't do it. So instead, they want the Western world, through guilt, to force the Israelis to give them what they want without concessions on their part. And going to the International Court is just another example of that. They want to try to haul Israeli leaders into court for war crimes. And Israel's not a party to the ICC.
Nor is the United States.
Right. But Western Europe is. And so the Palestinians are trying to isolate Israel diplomatically and punitively so that Israel will concede because of external pressure. And it's not going to happen. And the Palestinian leadership will continue to fail their people. It's a serious problem. Now, there are plenty of people on the political left and center who say the current situation is untenable, and therefore the Israelis, who are the stronger party, constantly have to try to find a way to incent the Palestinians to come back to the table, et cetera, et cetera. And other people smarter than me will have to figure out if that's really ever going to be possible, or whether it's going to have to wait for another generation of leadership beyond Abbas who's ready to accept the reality. You had a similar situation with different issues between the Protestants and the Catholics in Northern Ireland, and it took a long time to get leadership to begin to say, maybe just killing each other isn't the way we're going to work this out.
Let's get to some audience questions. I've got someone handed me the first one. Steve, if someone handed you $100 million, here, me.
You'd probably give it to me in Weimar dollars.
For the Federation, how would you spend it? Thank you.
As an endowment or as...
I don't know. You get to choose. You can put it in the endowment if you want.
Yeah. Well, there's a number
of... my kids have a save, spend, and give jar.
Yeah.
One of each, yeah.
I wish my kids had that. Anyway, I think we would be spending a big chunk of it to bring day school tuition down to a level where almost anybody who wanted to go to a Jewish day school experience would go. We know that tuition costs are a barrier for many families. And second, we'd use the money to expand the schools so they would have the physical capacity. We would put another big chunk into Jewish camping. Jewish camping has a huge positive effect on Jewish engagement and Jewish identity. Third, we would probably make Jewish preschool next to free. You always want to have people put some money in because you want them to have some, buy-in and
some skin in the game.
Yeah, but they're committed to it. They're not just taking it. But we would make a big investment in Jewish preschool because that's a proven way to engage not just with the young kid, but also their family members. And I think we could change the course of a lot of people's minds. We know now that when we're able to make that available for the limited number of people that we can, we see very positive engagement in families that are where the two Jews are married together, or when there are intermarried families, because then they get an opportunity to engage. So those are just some of the ways that we would quickly, and that's
wish list.
Yeah, and there's also some very serious issues we have in the area of how we're going to deal with the growing number of older people in our community who are going to have issues with Alzheimer's, dementia, and we have the other issues with affordable housing for people with special needs, as well as we have a growing number of older people who are going to find themselves financially challenged when it comes to providing for the basics. So I think that would chew up a lot of the 100 million.
All right. You mentioned...
But I'm open to it.
Yeah.
But what do I do the second year?
You mentioned intermarried couples, and this audience member says, I understand that the Federation recently funded a position to welcome interfaith families to Cleveland, which I fully support. Can you talk about the decision to invest in creating a welcoming climate for Jews who marry non-Jews?
Well, it's just a basic reality that we face in Cleveland. We, as a federation, are committed to having as many people engaged in Jewish life as possible. And in the study that we did in 2011, we found that in the intermarried households, 33% were raising their children Jewishly. 22% were raising them as Jewish and something else. 23% were raising their kids as nothing. That is, they weren't making a commitment one way or the other. 7% for sure were raising them as non-Jews. And 14% were still trying to figure it out. So that said to us that we had a big opportunity to engage with the people who were either undecided, weren't acting, or were doing both. And that one of the barriers to engagement was fear of being judged or not knowing enough about how to go about engaging.
The Federation, was worried about being judged?
No, the families are, the interfaith families are worried about being judged.
Oh, yeah.
Because for so long, the stance in the community was intermarriage is bad, intermarriage is evil, and therefore you're being judged. And it was faced at the get-go because nobody would marry you Jewishly.
Oh, right.
Right? You couldn't find a rabbi.
You couldn't find a rabbi to do it.
So let's say that you have a Jewish, a Jew and a person who wasn't born Jewish, and they want to get married, and the Jew says to the non-Jew, would you mind if we had a rabbi do it? And the person says, no, that would be okay. You know, I respect your tradition, and then finds out that that tradition doesn't respect them, de facto. So, you know, it sets up a bit of a conundrum if you're trying to engage people later. Like, you didn't want me then, you want me now?
Right.
Well, okay, that's what we're facing. And so there's this sense of being judged. And so when you become a more welcoming community, you're trying to erase the judgment.
Is it working out? Or has it just gotten started?
It just got started, but we see some positive shoots.
Okay. Does the Federation send aid to Central and South American Jewry?
Not today. They are essentially self-sustaining.
All of them?
Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean?
That means Argentina is able to educate its children and take care of its welfare needs, and the same is true in Mexico, and the same is true in Costa Rica and Panama, and Colombia.
You got some mission trips to Cuba, though, which apparently
okay.
I've heard are responsible for the opening of Cuba. Congratulations.
Okay. Cuba's 1,500 people, and they get more aid per Jew than any Jewish community in the world.
Is that because the Jewish men of Cleveland really enjoy cigars?
It's close. It's not just Jews in Cleveland, but there's a lot of trips to Cuba, and they're taken care of. Cuba's tough. I mean, you can only do so much in Cuba altogether because of problems with, you know, if the current environment changes the way President Obama has indicated it could go, it will greatly change what's going on in the Cuban Jewish community. But that's the only, I forgot about Cuba.
Okay. But I mean, what you're essentially saying about Central and South America, though, is that those populations are doing okay.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot to worry about there.
That's a different question.
Oh, there is a lot
You
to worry
said
about.
money.
I did. You said self-sustaining.
Venezuela, Jews are being pressured by the anti-Israel stance of its government. It began with Chavez, it's continued with Chavez's successor. So Jewish life in Venezuela is a little dicier.
Okay. How do you see the distribution by age of the Jewish population in Cleveland changing in the next 20 years, and what are the implications of this? And you've already spoken to this a little bit about the aging population.
We'll get older.
All of us.
God willing, but as a percentage, we'll become a slightly older community because our birth rate is not at replacement level, and notwithstanding the higher birth rate in the Orthodox community, and people are living longer, and our services are helping people to live longer, so we're going to become a grayer community over the next 20 years. I mean, I hope
more demands on your budget, I would imagine.
Oh, no, sure. See, one of the ticking time bombs is the changes in the pension system. 20 years ago, you had companies providing fairly decently for people's retirement. And in the last 20 years, that began to move away from companies preparing for retirement for their employees to putting the responsibility on the back of the employee. And they did it with a lot less money than they were paying into their pension plans. So all the 403Bs in the world, or 401Ks, aren't going to offset the losses that were provided by companies when they cut out their defined benefit pension plans. And we're just at the cusp of seeing that now, but over the next 20 years, it's going to really roll in and people aren't aware of it. And if people don't save enough on their own, we're going to have a financial crisis among older people in the community. We talk about it today. It's a little, I don't have a clear plan for how we'll handle it over the next 20 years, but we'll face it.
There's a couple of questions about Europe, Paris, and its impact on our community, and specifically how the Federation is engaged in combating anti-Semitism in Europe. But given the events, all of this there's a lot of activity and a lot of events to consider. But I wonder how you and your colleagues at the Federation and the broader Federation community of donors and others who have been probably calling you a lot over the last few weeks.
Well, there are some specific things, but then there's the larger, more complex issue. So I'll deal with the more simple things first. In the French community, I think if you came tonight, you're aware of the facts, right, by definition, because who else is interested in knowing? So look, Jews are under attack physically in France from fundamentalist Islamic propaganda among the poor Arab French citizens who've come out of North Africa, fundamentally, to France over the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. There are 5 million Muslims in France, about 8%, I'm told, of the population, and 500,000 Jews. There are no-go zones in France.
But of the 5 million Muslims, I mean, the radicalized portion is a tiny, tiny fraction of that 5 million.
It's unclear. It's clear that the radicalized group is small, mm-hmm, but the next circle that tolerates attacks on Jews is larger, mm-hmm, significantly larger. Mm-hmm. This isn't to say if you're by definition a Muslim, you're anti-Semitic. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. I'm saying there's a lot of them. that are anti-Semitic, and they're bringing both the anti-Semitic teachings that are in the Quran to bear, as well as the hatred from the Middle East in general. And they've made France a very uncomfortable place, as they've made cities in Sweden, as they've made Denmark.
Can we pause for a moment? You said the anti-Semitic teachings that are in the Quran. You
Yeah.
know more about the Quran than I do, I suspect.
There's passages that talk about Jews as monkeys. There's passages where Muhammad is told to kill the Jews. You can find all this in the Quran, as well as places that say don't hurt the Jews.
Right.
So it's both there. So the
But it's the
guys,
same, I mean, it's the sort of material, you could find similarly damning material in the Torah about...
I don't think so. Unless you consider getting rid of Amalek a general okay to kill all non-Jews. I don't think that's the...
You have Abraham prostituting his wife, things like that. I mean,
without getting into the details, the story of Abraham and Sarah with Pharaoh is a far cry from saying, kill the Egyptians.
No, but we did kill the Egyptians.
There was a national liberation battle, and we didn't kill them, God did. Moses killed one. God took care of the rest.
Okay.
Muhammad didn't say God do it. He was just a prophet saying do it. I mean, we can debate this, but I don't accept the moral equivalency argument.
Okay. I'm
So
not going to debate it.
It's not going to take us anywhere tonight.
No. It's an argument we can save for another time, perhaps.
I'll buy you breakfast.
Perfect. But I cut you off. I interrupted you as you were
Anyway,
discussing about the rise of anti-Semitism.
So you have this physical assaults going on, where Jews are being attacked if they wear a yarmulke, they wear their tzitzits out, etc. And there's these no-go zones in Paris, where even the police generally don't go. And but that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you have a French government where the prime minister this last week said he can't imagine that France can be France if all the Jews leave. And the government for sure is not anti-Semitic. It's not like the Russian government, the communist government of the Soviet Union, which was avowedly anti-Semitic. So you have this conundrum of a segment of the population that is anti-Semitic by nature in terms of historical considerations. And then you have most of France, which is not anti-Semitic, but the Jews don't feel safe. And then you have these attacks. And these attacks are regular, more regular than you'd like to think they would have. And you have the situation in Brussels where the guy came in and you have the radical guys coming back. And so you need the governments there to be a lot more intensive on following these guys. They had these guys under surveillance. They decided that they were not worth following because there were other fish to fry. I'm not second-guessing the French government, but maybe today the message is you have to second-guess yourself and follow more people than you thought you had to follow. There is another issue in Europe about how the Israeli issue plays into it all. On the surface, you could try to say that if you criticize Israel's policies, it doesn't mean you're anti-Semitic. That's a pretty normative kind of statement, except when people start saying, but you don't criticize anybody else, and you don't hold the Palestinians to the same standard. So you're holding Israel to a higher standard. And this came out most recently in the response to Gaza. The European governments were pretty good about saying Israel has the right to defend herself, but only so far. only in proportionality. And if they kill too many civilians when they're trying to suppress the rocket fire that's coming out of civilian areas, Israel should be condemned. And therefore, the message is, you, Israel, should tolerate the missile fire because not enough of you are being killed to not tolerate it. So that the Western Europeans were basically saying, it's okay to have to run to shelters. It's okay that your children will live in fear and won't leave your side and won't go outside. It's okay that elderly people can't go out and get their food and medicine because there's rockets coming down. As long as they stay inside and they don't get killed, it's okay that life is disrupted because you might kill too many people to suppress the rocket fire when you shoot back. This was the fundamental message in Western Europe. And some people would suggest that that's anti-Semitic because it's a double standard. It's being applied, quote, to the Jews. And it has to do with a reaction to the feelings of guilt from the Second World War when all of these countries were de facto collaborators with the Nazis, except in Denmark.
Other than speaking out about it and being in dialogue about it, is the Federation engaged in any efforts right now to sort of work on that issue of anti-Semitism in Europe? We're not. There are other organizations that are, AIPAC has been over there in the past trying to help the Europeans organize themselves. At the end of the day, we're talking about articulate, educated Jewish communities that are small in numbers relative to their populations. So they feel sometimes unsure of how to address their government. For example, the Jewish community in Turkey, it used to be about 25,000 people among tens of millions of Muslims. And when I went to Turkey 20 years ago, they would tell us, hey, life is pretty good. We have our businesses, we have our schools, we have our social service institutions, and we stay under the radar. Now this is when Turkey was ruled by basically a secular government and or a military supported government. And even then they just stayed under. And the relations with Israel were good. And the Turkish government thought that the Turkish Jews were a good way to access the United States Jews, who would then be pro-Turkey versus Greece. That was the situation 20 years ago. Today, the Jews of Turkey, they're not under the radar. They're digging under the ground because the current government is very much a religiously oriented Islamic government that is now anti-Israel. And you have government officials saying that maybe the synagogue should be turned into a museum. And they're afraid, and they're powerless. So, you know, we as an organized American Jewish community will say to the Prime Minister, now the President, you're going too far, but he doesn't care. You know, he's got a different agenda. And you saw in Sweden, where they're very pro-immigration, and a socialist government came in, and the first thing they did was to recognize a Palestinian state. And the Swedish Jewish community is a little nothing. There's nothing they can do. They're too small. So the only place you have strong Jewish communities are in France and moderately so in Germany. But you're talking 200,000 Jews in Germany. In Germany, I think, is 80 million people. Is it 80 million? Something like that. There's a very strong public message of support for the French Jewish population, though, from I think it was the Prime Minister who said if the Jews leave, we are no longer France. Right. Yeah. The government of France is appalled at what's going on. So let's see what they can do. But you know, we're providing funds for security right now if they need it. There are questions about the day schools, questions about the next generation of leadership, questions about the recession and the and all sorts of questions that we're not going to get to, Steve. I might save them for breakfast, though. Steve Hoffman, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much.